Well, I was very, very grateful that Drew was willing to speak this weekend. I did not know going into this weekend how bad my voice was going to hurt yesterday and last night and throughout the night as I tried to sleep. So I imagine it was a God moment, to have him scheduled to speak. And I don't know how many of you know that Drew's very special to me. He's a brother. We've been through, I think I can say, through hell and back together, through lots of tough times and good times. And I consider him one of my very best friends and somebody that I trust with my life. He comes to our house anytime he wants to, and if he keeps forgetting the code to the door, but if he remembered it, it would be fine with us. We just keep giving it back to him. But there's times when he's got to go to work and I'm off on an appointment somewhere and he don't want to run back home. I'm like, well, just go to my house and hang out. It's okay. Yeah. And so he just go in and watch TV and whatever, hang out till it's time to go to work. So that's how much we trust him, and that's how much we love him. And so he's going to speak to us today about some stuff he's gone through in his life. Let's welcome him.
Thank you. Good morning. Well, thanks for the introduction, Brian. So Brian came to me, I don't know, it was about a month and a half or so ago, and asked if I would be interested in preaching every once in a while, and with his voice stuff too, and just growing in the church. That's something that I thought about doing too. So I wanted to give a little bit of my story for those of you that didn't know me. Everybody knows me sitting here, but in the second service, there's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of new faces before COVID started that I didn't really get, because I've been working with the preteens and teens. So I've been in the back a lot, working with them, so I haven't really got to meet everybody. So before I started to preach every once in a while, I kind of wanted to give a background about myself, because part of what I preach about is what God brought me out of. So, I'm sure he'll give me other words along the way, but every time I think of something to preach about and pray about it, it's usually what God brought me out of and what I've learned from that. So I just wanted to give a background about myself. My name is Drew, and I grew up in Katanning, Pennsylvania, about 40 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. So I kind of grew up around the city life. My background is I come from an addicted world. I started using drugs at a very young age, 12 years old, started drinking and using drugs. I won't get into all of that. Drugs are drugs, and addiction's addiction, no matter what it is. So whatever brings you away from God is something we need to work on. So, but the main thing is, that's why I have a heart for the kids, is because I started using drugs at such a young age. I understand the peer pressure and trying to find who you are. That 12-year-old age, that preteen age, is you're finding your identity and who you are, and I always struggled with that. I struggled with who I was, fitting in. I tried to hang out with the football player people, the basketball players and that kind of world, and I didn't feel comfortable. I always felt kind of awkward and everything. But when I started to use drugs, I quickly jumped into that world. The anxiety went away. I found it really easy to learn how to hustle and buy. And I was never a drug dealer by no means. I was a drug addict. I could never say I was a drug dealer. I would buy and sell, and that would support my habit, but I was definitely a drug addict. And but I easily became popular in that world. My whole high school, from 12-year-old up, I became like the go-to guy in school, and I liked that, and it made me feel, it created my identity, it molded me into the drug addict that I'd become. So that's what happened. That's why I have a heart for the kids, because I understand the finding your identity and who you are and getting manipulated by the drug world. It's really easy, especially now with social media and stuff. It's so easy for kids to learn that stuff even quicker, I think. So real quickly, I started to experience consequences. I got expelled from a school and had to go to another school. Barely made it through there. And consequences started to pour in. Right after high school, I did jail time, rehabs, and from high school clear up until I moved out here to Ohio, my whole adult years is where all I did was go through periods of sobriety and failure, and sobriety and relapse. It was a cycle. It was a vicious cycle. It was what I call worldly recovery, and that's what I was doing. I was trying to get sober on the world, on the world's behalf. I would go to government programs. I would try Suboxone, methadone. I'd go to halfway houses and stay there for 3 or 4 months. Get out, get on methadone treatment. For those of you who don't know what Suboxone and methadone are, they are to help you get off heroin and opiates. It curbs the cravings. I think they were meant for a 4 or 5 day fix until you got through the physical cravings, but they have become a crutch drug, and people stay on them now for years, and that's not life transforming. That's not transforming your life. That's just going on another crutch. But I did that. I would stand in the methadone clinic because when you start those things, you have to wait in line for hours. I would wait in line from 5 in the morning till 7 in the morning sometimes, depending on the line and where it was at, just to get my dose for the day. So I very quickly failed at all that. So, which fast forwards me. So over the years, from high school till 4 years ago, it was jails, rehabs, institutions, maintenance drugs, anything that could try to get me sober, I tried. Until one day I went to outreach. Now, I've been with this church for 10 years, and before I went to outreach, I was coming to this church. I'll skip all the details, but I have a son, and I had custody of him, and I was trying to raise him. When I first moved to Ohio, I was trying to raise him the best that I could with what I knew how to do, and tried to stay sober on my own will. I wasn't following Christ. I wasn't a Christian. But I was coming to church and trying to be a good father, But I wasn't. I mean, you guys were planting seeds, Brian was planting seeds, which I didn't know. Chris was planting seeds, which I didn't know. Yeah. The first time I met Chris, he slips me a 20, and I'm like, this dude's easy. Now he knows to give a can of food instead of a $20 bill. Huh, Chris? Yeah, true. But those are the things. I was coming to church, but I wasn't changing my heart. I was just trying to be a good dad, and eventually it led to relapse. Thank God he's with somebody. My son's with somebody that loves him and has always been there. Yeah. So I went to outreach, and that is where I met God for pretty much the first time. I experienced it with you guys, but the walk started at outreach. And I was there, for those of you that don't know, Outreach is a faith-based men's facility. And it's pretty much an undercover Bible school. It's really what it is. There's a guy, Ryan Hoffman, there that I learned a lot from. And we just dive into the Word, And but I was there, and I ended up being staff there. But what happened was, again, I was doing what I wanted to, and I relapsed. And that was 4 years ago. This New Year's Day, I'll have 4 years of sobriety. So, but that was 4 years ago. I relapsed, and God showed me something out of that, because I was only out there for a week. You guys prayed over me, prayed for me to come back, and I did. And I was only out there for a week. That's never happened before. Anytime I've ever relapsed, it's been for years, So I was out there for a week, and God gave me a choice. It was stay in that or come to Him. Pretty much was what I got out of that. So when I got back to outreach, I dived into the Word, and I really started to try to find my identity, because I still, even though I said I was a Christian and I was at outreach for over a year, I still was doing things that I wanted to do, like my flesh wanted to do. I was watching things I shouldn't have been watching. I was acting ways I shouldn't have been acting. I was taking guys to church and sitting in the lobby and watching TV on my phone. You know, I mean, talk about a hypocrite. You know, I was a hypocrite. And so I really started to dive into the Word, and I started to find my identity. And one of the verses, and I'm going to throw a couple verses out here to you, and one is Romans chapter 8, verse 14. And it says, "For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may also share in his glory." And I always lived in fear. Like, every time I'd get sober, there was always a fear, because I didn't want to be a drug addict. Like, I wanted to change, but there was always a fear that I would go back. And that took care of that fear for me. So, and then 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old has gone, and the new is here." So there's three things out of them two verses. I no longer live in fear of going back to a drug addict, because my identity isn't in I'm a drug addict, or I used to be a drug addict. My identity is I'm a new creation in Christ. So I'm a new creation, I'm a child of God, I no longer live in fear, and I have a new family in God's kingdom. So I really started to dive into the Word and look at God's family. That brings me to you guys. So there's a bunch of you guys in this church. So for those of you that are new and don't know a whole lot of people yet, when we put ourselves out there and try to meet people, you'll see who God's people are. You know what I mean? So Brian, I don't know if you guys know this, but Brian and Melissa were like my phase 4. I lived with them for a year. Pastor Brian and Melissa, I lived with those guys for a whole year. With them, I learned what a healthy relationship in Christ was between two people, and experienced God's love through that. Love you. I've tried not to cry.
It's all right.
The Dawson family. You know you're part of the Dawson family when you're sitting around the table arguing who's getting Chris's tools when he dies. So, you know, I get all the stuff Cheyenne don't want. So, Rob Sanders moved me into his house at one point in time. Lauren moved me into her house at one point in time. Tammy and Kelly Gray, the Phillips family. If you want to know how to get your finances together, see Tim. Yep. So, the baby pantry, you know, when I had my son, really helped me out. So, I mean, diapers and formula, and they even brought Christmas to me one time. And then Chris Allen gave me a job when, you know, and got me on my feet. So why I have a heart for that's part of God's family. So that's what kind of church you guys have here. Why I have a heart for the kids is why I explained that, is because it's a struggle when you're that age. And I really feel like what I want to accomplish, what we should as a church has accomplished with kids, is that with our kids, is that we really need to pour into them Christ's love and have a place for them to come. Even though there's only 1 or 2 kids coming, we are going to be open for them to come. Well, I mean, our class is going to be open. And most of the kids that know, their parents know me, I've called them and said if they need to talk about anything, they can talk to me about it, you know. So I put myself out there with the kids. So one thing to bring it back to is Jesus. Jesus is the only way. If you're struggling with addiction or you have a loved one struggling with addiction, Suboxone and methadone and all these rehabs they can be a good bridge to get there, but it's not life transforming and heart transforming. Jesus is. Jesus is life transforming. So if you have especially if you have anyone in your family that's struggling with addiction, or even, it doesn't even have to be addiction, even if you're enabling them to just be lazy or like just not live life, I suggest to show some tough love. Let me show you what tough love looks like, is that I became homeless at one time and I had this cat. And I thought I was going to manipulate Brian and say, hey, can you take my cat for me? And then in my head, I'm like, he'll offer me a place to stay. He took my cat. So that's what tough love looks like. And sometimes, I still have that cat. He got through 4 years of that, And I'm pretty sure he put Brian and them through some tough times.
He peed on the bed.
He peed on their bed. So, they've done a lot for me. But anyways, if you have family members that keep coming back into your life, bumming money because they're on drugs, don't give them money. Give them Jesus. And sometimes giving them Jesus looks like you need to go.
Yep.
Until you hit a bottom that Jesus can pull you up out of, that you're willing for Jesus to pull you up out of. So if anybody ever has any questions about addiction or enabling, feel free to talk to me or Brian about that.
Amen.
So.
Thank you, Drew.
Yeah. So, a lot of us that are very, very proud of him and what he's been through and where he's come to. And God's just getting started with him. Before the pandemic, he had 8, 10, sometimes 12 kids in his preteen class, and he works hard at that, and they have a lot of fun. And so I can see part of what gaps we were having in ministry here starting to be filled. And one of the things that excites me about that is that it's being filled with people whose lives have been transformed through the ministries here and through the people and the relationships here. I mean, I think that's the way it should work, right? That it should be in-house growth that we get to enjoy and see, and hopefully in 5 or 10 or 20 years we look back and we can say, I brag about this all the time with folks. I say, well, our worship team, they were on drugs at one time. They were a Satan worshiper. They were whatever, and it's like, and now they've been transformed by the love of Jesus. That person over there, I kicked him off the team one time, and now they've been redeemed. And it's just an awesome, awesome thing to see what God does in people's lives. So